Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you are here. Today's conversation is with Frank Sesno. Frank is an Emmy award-winning journalist whose career spans over 4 decades at the highest levels of broadcast news. As CNN's former Washington bureau chief, White House correspondent, and anchor, he covered presidential campaigns, superpower summits, and world-changing events from the fall of the Berlin Wall to 9/11. Frank has interviewed 5 U.S. presidents and countless world leaders. Now, as Director of Strategic Initiatives at George Washington University's School of Media and Public Affairs, Frank shapes tomorrow's journalists while pioneering environmental storytelling through his acclaimed Planet Forward initiative. Frank's book, Ask More, The Power of Questions to Open Doors, Uncover Solutions, and Spark Change, was an early addition to my collection of books about questions and continues to inspire the work here at Curated Questions. So Frank, welcome to Curated Questions.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Beautiful. I always like to start in about the same spot in the conversation, and that is, when did you first understand the power of questions?
When I was in 4th grade. And when I was in 4th grade, this is my first recollection of understanding the power of questions. We were sending people up to space. It was a relatively new space program at the time. I will date myself. That's fine. And I came home from school one day and I asked my mother, because I'd heard about weightlessness and all this weird stuff. And I said, kind of half a whisper, how do the astronauts go to the bathroom up there? And she said, I don't know. Go ask your teacher. So my mother always told me, your teacher works for you. We pay your teacher's salary. Ask your teacher. So I did. I think her name was Miss Shimolevsky or something like that. So I remember raising my hand and asking in front of the class. And she was so embarrassed. Okay, this is the 1960s. She was so embarrassed by the thing. She took me out into the hallway. And she said, what's your question? Tell me what your question is. And I told her again. And she said, I don't know. I'll look into that. And I went back into the class. And the next day she took me back out into the hall to answer my question. But what I realized with that was, first of all, curiosity is this really cool thing that little kids do very, very well. That you can get people who are very different than you and way up in the power chart to actually respond. And you can satisfy your curiosity. And some questions are kind of weird or funny or embarrassing. But though there are stupid questions, which are ones I've written about, which are sort of deliberately troublesome, most of them are not. Most questions, if you don't know why the sky is blue, that's a fair question. Ask it and figure it out. So anyway, it started when I was a little kid.
Was that encouraged? Were questions and curiosity encouraged for you growing up?
Yes, it was. Well, certainly in school, because I remember I had another teacher. I think he was 8th grade chemistry, Mr. Meyer. And he came over to me and he said, "You're a good student because you ask a lot of questions." So you try not to be a pest. I've always been a curious person about all sorts of things, and I like asking about it, which I guess is why I ended up in journalism, even though that was not my projected trajectory when I was a kid.
And having a chance to see you in person during the Sesno series roughly a month ago, it was fun. And I appreciated the evening before the government shutdown that we're living through. But it just seemed like you were really following your curiosity in those conversations. How do you actually think about going into these conversations?
Well, I've been interviewing for a very long time, and I love it because people fascinate me. And then you combine that with the curiosity and the questions, and you come up with a really wonderful experience. But the first thing I always ask myself when I do one of these events is, who is my audience? Because I represent them. My curiosity represents them. And I'm curious about lots of different things. So I can modulate my curiosity, or I can frame it around different issues. In that particular case, that event, Sesno series, was at the George Washington University. A lot of students and young people in the room. So I think a lot about the future and how they perceive the future and how they perceive the present based on their more limited sense of history than you or I might have. I also think about my audience at a particular moment in time. There we were, and you're quite right, we were operating in real time as the government, the Congress was deciding whether to keep the government open or to shut it down. Ultimately, obviously, they shut it down because they were deadlocked. So there was suspense, there was drama in the room. What's going to happen? What's the result? Who's to blame? What can you do about it? But I also, because I think of my audience, I prepare. And I had, before Senator Warner came in, fresh from the Hill, where that vote had just not taken place to keep the government open, I had a panel before him, a Republican pollster, a sort of student of our politics, and an alumna from George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs, who's now a journalist with the Washington Post, and she covers the Congress and goes behind the scenes literally every day on the Hill. So thinking about that, and we also incorporated voices of students, which we put into edited videos, short edit videos, and we rolled those in. The first one was sort of an overview. What's the state? How do you feel about where the country is right now? And we came out of that, and that was the point of departure for that conversation. So I used each of the video clips as conversation starters. So yes, I blocked out the conversation to have something of a story arc, as we like to say, because interviews are stories too. Conversations are stories too. They have a beginning, a middle, and end. But also, I try very hard, even though I outline it, not to be scripted. Because as I tell my students and everybody else, the best questioners are the best listeners.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I'm an active listener. I'm listening for what people say. I'm also listening for what they don't say. And that helps me respond and move the conversation.
Were there any things that happened early on in your career that were touchstone moments for you of where you really learned those lessons?
Plenty of them. I was a 23-year-old radio guy in Vermont wearing a flannel shirt and shortly out of college, maybe 22 still. And I had the governor of the state in the studio. And I don't even remember what the issue was now, but there was some issue that was quite controversial, and I wanted to lean in and really press him on that. And the name of the show, it was a talk show at noon every day called Checkpoint. What a boring name. But anyway, it's called Checkpoint. Well, partway through the conversation, because I'm kind of leaning on him in a nice way, but in a very Vermont way, which is where I was, which is a very kind state, especially then. He said, "Frank," he said, "what's the name of this program? Ambush?" And I wasn't trying to ambush him, but look, I have always believed that anybody in a position of thought and responsibility interviewing any public official should be asking that public official not only what she or he is doing and why, but also how's it going to happen, and what about people who say that's a bad idea, right? Again, I'm thinking of my audience, and my audience represents all points of view. And this is what we say about journalism, too. They hold people in power to account. All right, well, you want a housing plan that's going to give everybody, free house. How exactly is that going to be paid for? Where's the money going to come from that? What's that going to do to the marketplace? So that's what I was doing, and the governor chose to think it was an ambush. He was wrong.
So then adopting that mindset or that perspective of understanding you are there for the audience, the broad swath of the audience, how did you kind of take on that personality, I'll call it, to expand beyond? Because I don't know if you were a quote ambush kind of a kid or not, or however.
No, not at all.
Right, but then so growing into that, you've taken that on, or you've taken on that responsibility, and you understand that, and that's now reflected in your questions, right? To be able to press. What did that journey look like for you to get to that point where you're like, no, I need to ask these a little bit tougher questions?
Oh, I think that probably came, to be honest, with the microphone. As I mentioned, that conversation with the governor was when I was in my early 20s. I didn't grill him. I didn't then, and I certainly don't now believe that you badger people or harangue them or try to score points. I think you can ask very good questions that are very direct, but and that do, ask for and about accountability, but still be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the problems we've got in media now. It's one of the problems we've got in a lot of the interviewing now. A lot of it is barking at people. A lot of it is opinionating and then maybe turning a little piece of it into a question. And that's not what I do. That's not what I believe in. And it's not what I think serves the audience, if what we want and what we mean by serving the audience is to help them understand, appreciate something a little bit better, be a little bit enlightened about information or a personality, right? If I were interviewing this guy Otani, this ridiculous, or Yamamoto, these ridiculous pitchers for the Dodgers, I'm thinking of my audience. My audience just watch these superhuman athletes do superhuman things. So, you want to engage that on a human level too, which is also what I've always, always, always tried to do, is recognize that anybody I'm interviewing is a human being. And I'm also curious, quite apart from policy and everything else, so what makes you think? What makes you tick? What makes you think the way you think and act the way you act? Because you know what? If I can ask you some questions and you can explain that, maybe that audience I'm thinking about has a little bit better understanding of you as a person and where you come down and why on a particular issue.
Yeah, I think filling out or better understanding the whole person really will go a long way, especially in today's world where it's so much easier. I mean, the labels are so easy, and I get it. I default to laziness mentally. Yes, I want to make it easy on me. I want to burn less calories in my brain and such. So yeah, let me slap a label on and be less quick to embrace the nuance, which I think is what you get to when you're able to ask some of those questions to understand more of who the people actually are.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you asked me about my journey on this, the book I wrote that you cited came out of teaching a class. And it was a little bit of an experiment, this class. I was teaching the art of the interview, and I was curious as to whether my students actually cared about this. And did they know about different kinds of questioning? And did they need to know more? And as I have experienced this class, which I've been teaching for probably 15 years now, and as I've done more and more interviews, I've become more and more conscious about the fact that every person has a story, multiple stories, real stories to tell that make them three-dimensional, compelling, compassionate sometimes, fascinating human beings. I was doing a fireside chat / interview last week with a woman by the name of Nancy Kanwisher. Nancy Kanwisher is a professor at MIT. She's a remarkable neuroscientist. And she discovered, along with others, but she discovered the regions in our brains that are specifically responsible for and activated by recognition of faces and places, right? When you see face, there's a part of your brain that, by her study, has more blood flow, and the activity is taking place there. It's quite fascinating. Well, at one point, she was called a badass scientist because she shaved her head and had a graduate student with a Sharpie plot out the different regions of her brain on her skull. Why did she shave her head? Why did she do that? She had been diagnosed with lymphoma and she was undergoing cancer treatment. And she figured, well, if I'm going to shave my head, I might as well do something constructive with it.
Wow.
Exactly. What a great story. And what does it tell you about her as a person and a scientist and a professor and all of that? So knowing that, and people have all these different experiences and stories, some of which they don't even realize they have, that makes them so interesting. And as an interviewer, to try to figure that out and to try to mine those so that they can be shared with others is just a remarkable experience. It's also a remarkable experience just for two people, because it makes an interpersonal connection that's deeper and more significant than you can imagine, because you're going someplace special together.
I did a series through 2018 called my #Year of Connection. And it was prompted because of, as I reflected back on 2017, I was just going home to work. And I'm like, I'm just not connecting with people. And like one example was I didn't have anybody in my contacts list that had been to prison before. Well, good on me. I lived in my bubble, right? Well, but there's a huge amount of people in this country who have been in that system. And I'm like, I need to understand some of those stories. And so over the course of the year, I had 150 conversations with various folks that I would go out of my way to go meet and then have these conversations. And hearing the stories was just amazing. And in that example, it's not just the individual that goes to prison, but what's the impact on the rest of the family and the rest of the community now that individual is out of the picture for the time being? And how do the rest of them function and pull together as community? And it's like, hearing the stories are just remarkable.
And what they make you realize when you talk to someone who's gone to prison, what did they do? How did they get there? What was their childhood like? What were their parents like? Did they have role models? Do they acknowledge they made a mistake? What was the mistake? I mean, all these things. And when you ask these questions and you listen to people, you realize that the world is this infinitely complex place. And I think that's the other very important part of questioning, is to really embrace the complexity that goes with the human experience. And when we sanitize or iron out the complexity, we end up, I think, often in intolerant places where, empathy and compassion come from, big hearts and open minds. And I remember doing once when I was with CNN, I sat down with 4 young mothers who were receiving public assistance during one of our welfare reform debates, national debates. And all of them, they were moms, they had kids. One of them had 6 kids. They'd all had various issues in their past, whether it was substance abuse or something else. One of them flatly said that she was essentially said she couldn't read or couldn't read very well. One mom had 2 kids with congenital health, one of them heart issues, as I recall. And yet every one of them wanted to work. Every one of them wanted to care for their kids. They certainly appeared not to be bad people.
Yeah.
And you realize, wow, this is really complicated because, in fact, one woman talked about having a job interview the next day. And I said, oh, really? Where is that going to be? And I think she said Children's Hospital here in Washington.
Wow.
What are you going to do there? She said, I'm not sure, maybe a dispatcher or something like that. And I said, well, what do you think the pay is going to be? She said, I'm not sure, probably minimum wage. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you're going to go to have a job for minimum wage with however many kids you got. How does that provide for those children? And you just see these incredibly vulnerable people now with children who didn't ask to be brought into this world. And you think, okay, it's complicated. I'm not passing a judgment at all. And thinking of my audience, you know what I wanted my audience? I wanted my audience to have some sense of understanding for these young women and how complicated the issue of public assistance really is.
It is going through a whole bunch of unlearning and relearning that I've been doing over the last few years in thinking about, okay, if you isolate it to, okay, your public assistance. All right. So this is where you're at as of today. Then it's like, well, what does it take for me to actually get to work once I get a job, right? Do I have the right clothing? Or what is the time, using public transportation? But what is the time associated with doing that? And all of these different things that really add up to a far more complex life and planning that is required than for me in the middle class to go jump in my car and go drive.
Exactly. I mean, and this is the thing that comes out with this complexity. Look, should people have to work to get public assistance? 100% yes. Nobody should freeload. Nobody should scam the system. It's not good. Not good. But what do you do if someone has kids? Who's taking care of those kids? What do you do if you've got a job like you're talking about? You're a low-income person. You got to take public transportation, and the public transportation breaks down. You show up to work late. That's not good.
Yeah.
Or you have a car, but you don't have much money, and the car breaks down, and you haven't got enough money to repair the car. And when people are living on the edge like this, and you actually see the numbers of what they're earning and what they're spending and what it takes, again, this is how we understand how complicated it is. And you can come from any ideology and believe anything, but we should all be open to, learning new things. And, I didn't realize that.
You had mentioned listening. What do you think is one aspect of listening that would serve people in their day-to-day?
Two things: an attention span and shoving your own opinions and ideas to the side while you intensively listen. The listening is about the other. So in my class, I give my students an assignment. They have to talk to somebody, ask them questions for 20 minutes. And there are two words they may not use during that 20 minutes: I or me. Because what you often find when you end up in conversations, how you doing? Oh, not so great. As I was walking in today, I realized my house just burned down. Oh my God, that happened to me last year. What? Stop. How about, my God, your house burned down? Is everybody okay? Like, starting there. I call it the I syndrome. People want to talk about themselves. And the second is an attention span. Ask yourself, what kind of listener are you? Are you easily distracted? Are you off daydreaming? Do you pull out your phone, God forbid, and start looking at emails or texts or the weather or whatever, stocks, whatever it is? And if we could push those distractions to the side and be entirely focused on that other person, the listening is much more active and it's much more real. Not everybody's comfortable doing that, because sometimes the things you hear are very personal or they're very painful. And how do I respond? Somebody tells you they have cancer and they may only have 6 months to live. What's your response to that? That's hard. Somebody tells you somebody just died tragically in their family and they start crying about it. That's hard. Yeah. But whether it's a hard thing like that, or, hey, I just played the best round of golf of my life, there's a follow-up question, right? And there's a way of sort of getting into that moment and sharing it through your curiosity with that person. I say on the listening thing, I have what I call an echo question. And for people who watch 60 Minutes, they see it all the time, because the folks on 60 Minutes, the interviewers, the correspondents on 60 Minutes do it all the time. They will listen for an outstanding, shocking, surprising, unusual emotion or fact and repeat it literally in that person's words. So I'll say, how many podcasts have you done? Oh my God, I don't know, probably 15,000. And I'll just echo it, 15,000? And I'm willing to just about promise you, in 99% of the cases, somebody's going to say, yeah, 15,000. I started when I was 6 months old. I've been doing 3 interviews a day ever since. Whatever it is. I had two students at the front of a room. They were interviewing one another. The first one asked the other one a question: what was the toughest moment for you when you were in school before you got to college? And the other kid says, oh gosh, when I was in, I forget whatever grade, 8th grade, I had to stand up and leave homeroom and go and get tutoring and just special help in math. It was just humiliating. And the kid went on. And when the interview was over, he didn't seize on that. I did the echo question. I said, you were talking about leaving class. Humiliating? Oh my gosh, he said. I stood up. I felt like everybody's eyes were on me. I felt stupid. I felt inadequate. I felt like I was standing out and everybody saw me as dumb or whatever it was, something like that.
Yeah.
And all you did was echo that person's words back. But it's a great form of questioning. It's a great listening exercise because it keeps you very focused.
And it's beautiful in its simplicity. Completely
simplistic, simple. And again, you're using the other person's words. So it's not like you're misinterpreting. They can't say, well, that's not what I said exactly.
Yeah. An actionable takeaway, right? End of the month, Thanksgiving's happening, right? And the holidays, Christmas, we're going to be around folks and have the opportunity to listen and practice, and whether you like Uncle Joe or not and whatever he's talking about, that's a great way to ensure that you're listening and demonstrating that, but also just help further the conversation along in a meaningful way.
Right.
Yeah.
Or your eighth grader comes home and you say, "How was school?" And she says, "Yucko." And all you have to do is say, "Yucko." They'll start talking. Most of the time.
Right.
Not all the time, but most of the time.
Hmm. So then, because you had mentioned previously about preparing for interviews and the like, so what did that question practice look like? So do you like write down, create 500 questions? And I'm just making this up, right? Do you create 500 questions and then call through those, or what does that practice look like for you?
It kind of depends, but I prefer to think of my interviews as a 3-act play or a 4-act play, or however many acts I want, and have blocks of questions that are subject related. So, how'd you get into the business? What was your chief achievement? I'm already going to know that, by the way, because I've done the research on somebody. So we all have the sheet of music, right? But the interviewer is the orchestra leader, right? So you know how much you want the tuba to play. But so, how did you get started? What was your chief achievement? And where is the field going? And what do you think it's most important for people to understand? So, for example, with the scientist I was talking to, my blocks were your science and these regions of the brain. What are they? How'd you find them? What does it tell us about the human mind? Next, how do the things you've learned connect us to things we care about? Brain injury, dementia. Does it help us understand or address any of these things? And finally, where's the field going? What's next? And by the way, within where the field's going, because I knew this person, we talked, one of her big concerns was federal funding for science and scientific research. So that became a part of the conversation. And then I wanted to end with, tell me about you. Why have you done this all your life? 40 years you've been doing this. What is it? How did this get started? I didn't start with that because my audience was a science audience. So they were going to be interested in science first, I thought, not the person first. Understand the science and just how significant and interesting she is. Then you'll be even more rewarded by learning what kind of person she is. So I will generally block it out in terms of themes or topic areas, and then think about the questions within. Sometimes I will write down a specific question, especially if something's very specific. I might be asking you a data point. I might be asking you about something, in this particular case, in brain, that I didn't fully understand. I don't understand the term. I'm not a neuroscientist. So I've studied her work, and I can kind of try to boil it down. And I might say, well, here's what's been written about your science, and quote from it. Or here's what you wrote, and quote from it. What's that mean?
Yeah.
Or what is that leading to, or whatever. So sometimes I will have words to look at. Most times, and I talk to people about this all I can, you don't want to take a script into an interview. You don't want to be if you have every question written down, you're going to become a hostage to the page, and you won't be listening. You won't be in the conversation.
Yeah, previous guest, Cal Fussman, who's done a lot of interviews, he would talk, or his practice was write down as many questions as he possibly could, thinking ahead about, and then literally rip up the piece of paper such that it's kind of like, okay, I got it in my head now and I'm going to roll with it.
Well, I do something similar. I mean, I will, whatever time I spend working on whatever outline I've got, and I always take an outline in with me. And sometimes the outline contains either some of the response or other facts that I might want to refer to, right? But before I do anything, it's not exactly ripping it up, but I set that aside and I'll go for a walk. I'll say, what do I want out of Senator Windbag today? What do I want the audience to take away? What does the audience need to know, want to know? Just like boil it down to 2 or 3 things. And then that becomes sort of the reality check as you go through the interview itself.
Yeah, love the idea of the walk and letting it kind of settle in, and let the motion kind of help kind of figure it out and kind of percolate, or allow it to percolate a little bit. We had mentioned previously your Planet Forward initiative. What has the Galapagos taught you about questions?
The Galapagos. So yes, Planet Forward has something called a StoryFest competition, and students submit their stories. Independent panel of judges goes through the stories, and we designate winners. And for 8 years now, we've had a partnership with Lindblad Expeditions and taken our winners on a storytelling expedition. We've been to Alaska, we've been to Iceland, and we've been to the Galapagos. This last summer, we were in the Galapagos. I think the question for anybody who's been to the Galapagos is pretty, I bet it's a shared question, or a variation of the shared question. Because what you see in the Galapagos, you see almost nowhere else, which is the wildlife there have no fear of human beings. They don't run away. You could, it's not allowed, but you could practically pet a sea lion or an iguana if you were so inclined. And so the question is, to me anyway, some variation of, how is it that we all occupy this place, this planet together? How can we interact and coexist in a more respectful and harmonious way as we are seeing here? How is it that these creatures have no fear of human beings? And what can we, with humility, learn from that? Those are my Galapagos questions. That and how do you keep it nice like this?
Yeah, watching the little clip from you've got on the website there, that it was just remarkable to me that the team, was walking amongst these animals in their environment, and they were just, there wasn't a fear. That to me was just remarkable.
It is,
and remarkable to know that happens all over the island, or us islands, and the rest. I'm like, yeah.
It is remarkable, but this is the advantage of going places, and it's why we travel, right? We travel to see, experience, learn, have fun, and there are some places that are extraordinary because of the unique nature of what's there. I just came back from Greece a short time ago. I was visiting Olympia and Delphi and Meteora and of course the Acropolis, Parthenon in Athens, and just the awe of thinking there were these people, there was this culture 2,500 years ago that built all this stuff. What was that like? How did they do that? So I think that, packing your curiosity along with your socks and your underwear in your suitcase is a really good thing.
So for those kinds of trips, are questions a part of your preparation at all? I mean, even if it's a personal vacation or for any of those kind of trips.
Yeah, they're part of my preparation. They're part of my experience there. And so whether it's, whether you got a guide, or you're reading the stuff on a plaque in a museum, or you're talking to your AI chatbot, that curiosity can be really rich. But people have to train themselves. Not everybody has done this. Not everybody, I've done it for a living, and so it just comes naturally. And maybe it comes naturally, so I've done it for a living. But telling people it's actually okay to ask. I mean, I watched people on this trip. They barge in, took a picture, and then left. They're there to record the moment, not to learn from it. I'm not criticizing them. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways to travel, and people enjoy different things. That's fine. And not everybody has to be a serial questioner.
Yeah.
But to have a sense of where you are and what happened there, what went on. It's so fascinating. It's the same reason we read mysteries and watch movies. There are all these stories in all of these places, and figuring out how we get to those stories is what makes the experience particularly rewarding, I think.
So what do you think are some mechanisms for fostering curiosity?
Well, I think being deliberate about it, um, having the discipline or at least the interest in saying, you know what, I'm really going to put myself to the side here. I just want to be in this moment, in this place, present and curious. Um, you can do exercises. You know how we have listicles, 5 best schools, 5 best hospitals, 5 best places to retire, 5
Yep.
best questions. Okay. You're going someplace. What are the 5? In fact, I tell students all the time when they ask for a recommendation to talk to somebody for a potential job, for a job interview, I said, I'm not going to make an introduction until you do your research and you know who Ken Woodward is. And I want to see 5 questions you're going to ask him. So you can say, okay, what are 5 questions I'm going to take it when I have a guest in my class? I will ask the students to prepare questions ahead of time. They may not use it because something otherwise may come up, but that sort of discipline of saying, I'm making an appointment with myself to craft these questions. And so you're prepared, right? So I think that's one thing that people can do to be better questioners. And then, they can be a kid again. What does the 4-year-old do? Why? Oh, because that's when the sun comes up. Why? Well, that's because the earth is, revolving. Why? And you ask yourself, you can say, okay, it's kind of, again, like a listicle. What are the 5 questions that I want, or the 5 follow-ups that I want? There's an effort though that needs to be made. I think people need to be deliberate. They need to be, thoughtful, so that they're creating that time and space. They're like, I haven't thought of it like this before, Ken, but it's like, I'm going to make an appointment with my curiosity. Okay.
Love that.
We've got an hour from 2 to 3. Okay. What am I, I'm going to be staring at the Parthenon. My curiosity's in my backpack along with my water. How the hell did this get here? How long did it take them to cut one piece of marble? How did they carry 2 or 20 tons when all there were oxen and logs and water? I mean, how'd they move those things? It's so interesting. So you grant yourself that permission and that space.
I've done that kind of some of those thought things before, where it's like, stare at one brick in the wall and think about the individual that put it there. What did they eat for dinner that night? Right. And just just focus in narrowly and start to get curious about what's the story behind it. What foundry did it come through? Or, where'd the clay come from and all the rest? Yeah.
So, when I was a kid, I was a coin collector. I still have the coins and I always loved it. Again, this is part of my interest with history, but so here's this 1882 Morgan silver dollar. It's this big, it's a big, heavy piece of silver. And I'm thinking, where did that get made? And what did that city look like then? Carson City or New Orleans or Philadelphia, wherever. Who is the person who had that in their hands? They go to some bar like in the movie and plunk the dollar down, and they could buy.
Slap it down.
Because a dollar in 1882 was a lot of money.
Right.
That big old silver dollar meant that must have been jangling in your pocket. It was heavy and it made noise. You probably felt rich. It's just so interesting to think about all of
that. I guess the questions allow a little bit of time travel then in that case.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let's see. And in your book, Ask More, which, like I say, I do appreciate, you had broken it up in these 11 different categories. And one of the reasons I appreciated the book is that you organized it in a manner that I hadn't encountered elsewhere. So that was a fun kind of a shift there. So I know that it was published 10 days before Trump's inauguration. So this was back in January of 17. Lots have changed, and we now in America and the world around us. But then we now also have the rise of AI. So further more change. Is there a particular area in your book or a kind of question, category of question, that you think might be more important today than ever before?
Yes. So for people who haven't read the book, please do. But for people who haven't read the book, I broke this down by question outcomes, things that you can provoke and be conscious about and deliberate about with your questioning. Fundamental information, basic information. The building's on fire. When did it start? How many people are in there? When is it, how many firefighters are fighting it? Is everybody safe? Very basic informational questions. Strategic questions. Strategic questions look over the horizon. CEOs are supposed to be strategic thinkers and questioners. What is my chief opportunity or peril 6, 12, 24 months from now? They're supposed to be big thinkers. Creative questioning, right? You go into a brainstorming session. There's a big whiteboard. And the first thing that somebody's should tell you if you're going to do something like that is that nothing is out of bounds, right? If it's going to be a real brainstorming session. But there are questions there that can help you be a creative thinker. Time travel. Okay, Ken, it's 5 years from now. Your podcast is the #1 podcast in America. What are you doing? All right. So it's a future. The question is placed in the future. The question is now. It helps you leap over everything because, well, you're not going to get $10 million to promote this. But hey, it's 5 years from now and you're already there. So you say, well, I had $10 million to promote this. So it allows you to think, or helps you, encourages you to think creatively, we hope. One of the other types of questions that I wrote about in response to your question that I think is more important and urgent than ever is what I call bridge building questions. Questions that you can pose to people, who are wary, hostile, nervous, to help them open up, be at ease, perhaps trust you a little bit more. In the book, I refer to this, an example I give is hostage negotiating. Right? Someone's taken someone hostage, law enforcement comes in. The first thing they want to do is build a relationship with you and just get you talking, right? One of the people I interviewed for the book that does dangerous threat assessment. Somebody writes a letter threatening to kill somebody. Are they just angry? Are they mentally unstable? Or are they capable of pulling the trigger? Or are they planning to pull the trigger? Those are all different things. The FBI, the police, Secret Service go and they interview that person. Well, that person is not going to be happy to see whoever's walked in to interview them. How do they put them at ease? How do they get them to talk? They use what I call questions without question marks sometimes. So I understand you think so-and-so is the Antichrist, is out to destroy America. A lot of people think like that. Tell me about that. Right? You're not endorsing anything. You're not telling them they're right, but you are giving them the space because a lot of these people have never had an opportunity to speak before. I actually almost entitled that chapter of terrorists and teenagers, because in some ways, right? In some ways, teenagers, you're a parent of a teenager and they probably don't want to just open up to you, but they come home at 3 o'clock in the morning and you got to have a conversation. Yeah. And you can yell and scream and accuse, or you can try to figure out, hey, what are you doing when you know you're supposed to be in at 11? What's going on? Yeah. Not that it'll work, but it's a technique. So I think that in today's very polarized country, where you mentioned Thanksgiving, where we sometimes have families that say we can't have a conversation at the table, how we can use questions to create space for a conversation, to create space for listening, to know when to follow up and when to back off. More important, I think, than it was when I wrote the book. And when I wrote the book, I said, we have a world filled with opinion and assertion, and we need more question marks and fewer exclamation points. So it was happening then, as you point out, and it's just become more intense since.
Well, yeah, I think that, yes, the more questioning and curiosity and the like that we can get, definitely make for a better place. In your work at the college, what encourages you the most about the students that are coming in relation to questions?
Well, what encourages me most about the students that I spend time with is just I see and I hope their fundamental curiosity. and they are willing to ask questions. Yes, they can be trained to ask better, just as we coach them to play tennis. Really good tennis player can still play better. We teach them public speaking and debate. We can coach them. We can teach them how to be better, sharper questioners. And I got to tell you something. I think in the age of AI, our questions are going to become even more important, because with this now incredible tool, and sometimes it might be an incredible problem, but as a tool, the more deliberate and precise you can be in the question that you pose, with AI having access to so much data, the more specific the answer can be. It's also going to be easier, if you're asking very specific questions, to fact check that AI to see if it's right or wrong. But what encourages me is that young people are still curious. They still want a better world. They still want to know what they can do about it. And they're living, and they know it, in an incredibly turbulent and divisive time. But I think young people, almost by their sort of DNA and biorhythms, have the energy and the idealism and the curiosity, even when everything is, seems so daunting sometimes, to sort of push on.
Yeah.
So that would be my response to your question.
So you'd mentioned in AI and kind of the prompting. So as I was thinking about that as well, I'm like, yes, we have to get more precise or the more precise we are in our questions of AI. Let's say that AI doesn't hallucinate for the moment, but the more precise that we are with our questions, then the better response that we get from the AI. What about, or how do you see AI shaping the way that students, let's just say that for that age bracket, how do you see the AI shaping the students' ability to question? Because where I'm going with that is that you could just say, AI, I'm going to talk with Frank Sesno. Give me the 10 best questions that I should ask him. Right. Yeah. And that's now just going to weaken one's ability to question, right? To build better questions and like, so what are your thoughts about that kind of world?
It actually is a great question, and it's one that's got a lot of suspense around it, because the answer is we really don't know what that's going to do. I mean, my sense is, we talk a lot about inflection points in American history and human history and blah, blah, blah. I kind of think, as cliched as that is, we're probably at one now. Yes, there's been Google search and search engine search for a long time, and that's brought a level of knowledge that we never could have imagined to our fingertips. But this could actually be the thinking for us, or that's what some fear.
Yeah.
But if you said, well, what are the 10 best questions for Ken Woodward, is going to scrape what it knows from the digital world. Or if you ask Frank, what are the 10 best questions for Frank, it's going to scrape what's out there. But you probably wouldn't get the story about, sister I grew up with Down syndrome, and how that affected my life, right? So the research that you're going to do as a human being to another human being is going to reveal things that AI won't reveal. That being said, AI might be a very, very useful tool in digging up 5 questions.
Yeah.
Some angle on the questions. And this is where the precision to ask the right question becomes so important. So you said I had Senator Warner on stage. So what if I go into AI and I said, what are 3 questions for Senator Warner that recognize his role as a pioneer in technology? And then you pull a quote from a congressional hearing where he makes a comment about AI. And your then question to AI is, what are 3 questions that really hold him to account for this position, or something like that. I mean, again, very, very specific, but you've got to be knowledgeable going into it. So yes, if you want to just not do any homework and say, what are the 10 best questions? It'll kick something out. Probably be okay. Might be wrong completely, because I've gotten stuff that's flat out wrong. So I highly commend people to fact check their AI, but it won't have those human dimensions: compassion, humor, empathy, creativity, that you or I would come up with in what we want to know about somebody and from them, and then how we would ask to get there. I had Nancy Pelosi on stage years ago. I wrote about this in the book. I knew that Nancy Pelosi was a windbag. I didn't want a windbag on stage. I didn't want somebody to come on and just do talking points. So I got her on stage and I said, Congresswoman Pelosi, how about if we start with a game? She goes, what? I said, yeah, let's start with a game. Let's play a word association game. I'll say a word or a phrase, and you give me a one-word response. Can't be more than one word. And she goes, oh, okay. So I asked Trump. She goes, ugh. I asked taxes, investment. Oh my God, what one word will tell you, right? Now, the reason I did that was to establish a rapport and a rhythm with her. AI would never have told me to do that.
Right.
AI would never have told me to do that. So these are the kinds of things that why we need our own creative human brains on some of this.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. But let's see. I always like to bring things as we wrap up or head towards wrapping up, I like to bring things very much to the present. And so I've got, I ask folks what their right now question is. So this is something beyond what's for lunch or dinner, and if I'm going to get married and who am I going to get married to, and just kind of comes to very much the present moment. So with that said, what is your right now question? The questions that you're wrestling with right now?
How are we going to get through this? I've been involved in media and work at the global and national level really my entire life. But I did start at a little local radio station in a town of 16,000. And when I go into towns and communities, I see people doing all kinds of kind things. You don't hear about that. All we hear about is the culture war that we're at and all of that. And so many of our leaders play off that culture war, and they feed off that culture war. And so much of our media feeds off that culture war because it gets clicks and eyeballs. We've been in bad times before. We've been at war with ourselves. Our streets have been on fire. We'll get through this. The question is how and when. And so on a very serious level, that's what I ask myself. And then on a less serious level is like, how do we have a good time? How can people be happy and fulfilled? And, we're bombarded with information and mis and disinformation and buy this and do that and all the other stuff. And yet there's this absolutely beautiful splendor and tranquility that comes from just being alone and just being quiet someplace, or being with really remarkable people. I went trick-or-treating with my grandkids, 4 years old and 2 years old. Oh my God, it's just nice. It's the best. And, all that wonderful innocence and all the wonderful things that people wanted to do for these little kids, there's a lot of goodness out there. And so, what I think about in my here and now moment to what you're asking me about, and to that point is I refuse to say that we're just in a deep, dark hole and we're just going to go down a deep, dark hole and there's no way out of it. I just don't believe that. But we're going to need to ask ourselves a lot of the right questions. Some of them are going to be very uncomfortable to figure out what's next.
Beautiful. Thank you. A remarkable conversation. And yeah, I'd rather focus on the goodness that's out there, even though it may not be getting the news time or the reporting that it does. But yeah, my soul needs a little bit of hope. So I appreciate you going there.
And it doesn't mean we do that at the expense of all else. I mean, one of the nice things about questions and the chapters in my book, different types of questions, we ask different types of questions. Some are questions that are going to make us really crazy upset, and others that we hope will make us feel better. Modulating that is what you do as an interviewer, right? There's going to be a moment in an interview where it's kind of tough and pushback. There's going to be another moment in the interview where you're going to find a way to laugh or smile. And we have to do that with ourselves too. We have to modulate our curiosity and where we focus ourselves and where we try to help in the world.
Sounds like a plan. Well, Frank, thank you for coming on and being a part of the Curated Questions community. So where's the best place for folks to catch up on the things that you're excited about?
We can connect on LinkedIn at Frank Sesno. I have my website, franksesno.com. And, people can send me a note there if they want through Squarespace.
Yeah.
And they can just ask. I'm also at GW. My email here is sesno@gwu.edu at the George Washington University. So if anybody's got any further questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work that you're doing and the questions that you ask and, emulating this. I said in my book, and I believe this, it's not flattery, or it's not imitation that's the sincerest form of flattery. It's curiosity and questions. If I ask you about your life and how you're doing, if I ask my kid how he's doing, if I ask a student how they're doing, I'm expressing my interest, my curiosity, and that is the sincerest form of flattery. I care, and we care. So I just thank you for doing this and for celebrating Curated Questions.
That's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.